So you'll be in front of a decent crowd, right? So
all right.
We'll talk your head up. We'll build you up. Then we'll bring you down. Then we'll build you back up again.
Story of my life. Yeah. It's no problem there.
Hey everyone, we put out a teaser for the podcast this week on our Facebook page. Well, our guest today gives us a behind-the-scenes tour of the Bernheim Distillery. This is Heaven Hill's, distillery that is not open to the public, so we're very fortunate that Denny gave us the opportunity to film some footage to share with everyone. There's going to be a new video published again on Sunday, so look out for that one. Most people are aware by now, there's a giveaway for a Michter's Barrelhead on our Facebook page, so make sure you go to facebook.com/Bourbon Pursuit and get yourself entered, because that promotion will end on August 11th at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you remember a few months ago, we partnered with the Kentucky Derby Museum to bring their Legend Series interviews with Fred Minnick to the podcast. On Thursday, September 7th, the Derby Museum is hosting a 5-course dinner paired with different Four Roses recipes to commemorate Al Young's 50th anniversary. Al and Brent will also be there in attendance. Tickets are $100 a piece, and the bottles will also be available for sale. Seating is limited, so go to derbymuseum.org to reserve your spot. Remember, if you like the show, support us on Patreon, and thank you to all of you who are supporting at $10 a month and sporting your limited edition Bourbon Pursuit t-shirts. We also like you to write an iTunes review for us. It's the best possible way to spread the knowledge and boost this podcast success. This week's shout out goes to C. McKinney 9530, who wrote, "In the current world of bourbon misinformation, assumption, and rumors, they get to the bottom of hot topics by going straight to the source with awesome interviews from top industry professionals and personalities. It doesn't matter how knowledgeable you are already about bourbon, this podcast has something for everyone who enjoys the brown nectar of the gods." Thanks for that awesome review. With that, enjoy this week's episode. Welcome back to the episode of the Bourbon Pursuit Podcast, the official podcast of bourbon. This has been a fun week. Been doing a lot of different things, and today we're again at a distillery that I've actually never seen this part of the distillery before, and I've got a guest co-host on today. So I'm riding solo, but I was able to have Linden Ferguson back on the show again, one of an old guest co-host of ours. So Linden, welcome back, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. When you say old, I'm almost 40, so it's getting up there. But yeah, I'm really excited to join you again. It's been fun the last few times we've done podcasts, and so I'm really excited to meet Denny and come here to Bernheim, which is a place that not many people get to see.
Absolutely. And you're saying getting old. I'm just saying your Just for Men covers it up pretty well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I don't see much gray. I think I've got more gray than you. So, but yeah, I mean, as you said, I think it's pretty cool that we're actually at a place that doesn't allow any public visitors yet as of today. And we get to also talk to one of the people that have been here for quite some time, knows the ins and outs of the industry, has a varied and historic background. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and introduce our guest. So today we have the man that's behind a lot of the famous brands that we all talk about on the show, like Evan Williams, Elijah Craig, Henry McKenna, Larceny. He's much more. There's much more than that. He's also he's the current Master Distiller, also the former Master Distiller, and also now the VP of Operations in Heaven Hill, Denny Potter. So Denny, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks guys. Thanks for having me.
So I told you I was going to build your head up a little bit right there, right?
Yeah, there it was. Yeah. Are you going to break me down because I'm 44? So, so I'm definitely the senior guy of the group.
Well, I mean, even with your age, right? I mean, it's there's kind of like a new regime or a new realm of younger Master Distillers that are starting to take over. You've got Harlan, Eddy, Russell, Davis from Maker's Mark, right? So I mean, there's a lot of like new blood that's flowing into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely seeing maybe new faces to the public, but not necessarily new faces to operations. And all the names you've mentioned there are people that have been in the industry for a while, and it's not with companies like ours and facilities like ours and the other ones out there. It's not something you can just walk into and all of a sudden be the face of these brands without truly understanding the operations and the people behind it. And I just think it's just one of those things that you kind of put your time in, you enjoy what you do, All of those guys are all operations guys, including myself, and that's where the passion has always been. It just happens to be fun talking about what we do. If somebody had told me, back in college that, I'd be doing tastings for hundreds of people and giving talks and doing all these other things, I'd been like, you're absolutely crazy. I wanted to be in operations. That's just kind of how I wanted to do things. But it's what a great industry, great company, great brands. It's easy to kind of get out and talk about it, and you kind of have a passion to share it with others. And so new faces, but not necessarily new to operations.
Right, because you've been doing it for years now, right? A lot of people that I even mentioned, they've been behind the scenes forever, and then you made your way through the ranks, right?
Sure.
Maybe not through the ranks sometimes, but also, you take different experiences from your past to be able to apply it to what you're doing today and everything like that.
No question. I started out. It'll be almost 20 years. I think at the end of this year it'll be 20 years, and I've done a lot of different things, and but been willing to do a lot of different things. I just had a conversation with a college graduate yesterday who, everybody's interested in how we get to where we are and how do they get involved in distilleries. And one of it is just be willing to do whatever it takes. It's very difficult to get to where we are without having to come in and work second shift and work third shift and work weekends and work holidays. These are all things that, distilleries run. You don't want to start a distillery up and shut it down. You want to start it up, run it, make quality product. And so, there are sacrifices that go into it. Just be willing to do those things and enjoy it along the way and appreciate the fact that you're part of the industry. And I've just been very, very lucky. I've worked for some, absolutely fantastic companies, some fantastic families, and it's amazing to look back and say, oh my God, it's been 20 years. It doesn't feel like it.
It's also funny when people say that. They're like, they have this aura. They're like, oh, it's a distillery. And then people like you are like, yeah, but we're just like a manufacturing plant, right? Like people have this idea that it's greater or grander than what it is. But it's very much it's a living, breathing, operating machine at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We manufacture. Some people might call us a chemical processor or something like that. I think the difference is the fact that this industry's been around for so long. They've been making, distilling, alcohol for hundreds of years. And, the big difference today is that, we understand the science behind it. We're able to control it better. We're able to produce more of a consistent product. But, yeah, it really is no different than any other manufacturing facility. It's just that we happen to be a part of an industry that has been around for so long and that people relate to. And a lot of that is because of the legacy, because of the stories, because of the families behind the brands. There is an aura about it that people are just genuinely interested in what we do. We're lucky.
I think it's great that people are interested in that rather than like, oh, how are pennies made, right?
Right.
It's kind of
right.
It doesn't really hurt that the bourbon boom for the last 8, 12 years or so that's really shined a bright light on the magic behind what is in a warehouse. So.
Yeah, no doubt. I was just telling somebody at Bourbon Affair last week. It used to be I was assistant master distiller at Makers for a little while, and when I would go out and do a tasting or a talk or some type of whiskey education, we literally would spend, or I would spend, the first 20 minutes telling people about the rules of bourbon. That's what and to see the look on people's faces where, for the first time, they heard, "What do you mean it doesn't have to be made in Kentucky?" It was just, if I were to do that today,
but we always prefer it to be made in Kentucky.
We prefer it. Absolutely, we prefer it because we can make it better here than anywhere else.
95% of the world's bourbon is made here.
The
rest isn't fit to drink anyways, right?
It is, yeah, right. But if I were to start out, let's take Bourbon Affair, for example. Bourbon Affair. So if I'd started out one of our events talking about the rules of bourbon, somebody probably would have slapped me in the face, and I would have deserved it.
Or walked out.
So it is. There has been this absolute evolution over the last 8-10 years where people, it used to be people would come to you to get educated. No, they're educating themselves outside of talking to you, then coming to you with some really good questions.
Sure.
Which I love. When you're talking about the rules of bourbon and doing that, you're talking to people. Whereas now, it's almost like a Q&A, and that's what I love. And like with Heaven Hill, we're very transparent about what we do. We've got our mash bills on our website, all those things. So it's easy to do Q&A because there's no real smoke and mirrors with what we do, and I just love it. I mean, anytime I'm showing somebody around or doing anything, I'm like, all right, this goes best if you ask questions. And then you can kind of tailor, that discussion, which usually will elicit additional questions. So, but yeah, the last 10 years with the way people become educated in whiskey has just been phenomenal.
Well, that's great. And then you kind of led us into our next little phase here, I guess, because you talk about you're the assistant MD over at Maker's Mark, but I want to talk about a little bit before that. Like, what's your history? How'd you carve your path? Where'd you start cutting your teeth? All that sort of stuff to where you ended up today.
Well, I guess so. It all started back in college. I went to Indiana University, and I went for a biology degree. My plan was to be a marine biologist. So what better place to try to become a marine biologist than go into a state school in Indiana?
I was about to say, in a landlocked state.
Well, but state school, cheaper tuition, all that. So the original plan was, get my bachelor's in biology and then get my master's in marine biology. And I just so happened, my wife and I went to high school together. So she was at IU. We graduated, got married pretty much right after college, and yeah, I was not going for my master's in marine biology, and I got a job right out of college working for a hazardous waste facility in the lab. And so the lab work kind of is absolutely what got me in. And I started out working as a lab tech at Jim Beam. So that was my first job 20 years ago.
Well, I want to roll back to this hazardous thing. Were you kind of like a Homer Simpson-esque character, kind of like sitting up there like with radioactive stuff? Or like?
No, man, I tell you, that job definitely gave me an appreciation for other lab jobs because the company I worked for was Safety Clean. And our job was, there were two jobs in the lab. Everybody sends their hazardous waste to Safety Clean. It's just a company that a lot of people know about. So one of the jobs was when the drums came in or the tankers came in, that we had to chemically identify and make sure that what they told us they were sending us was actually what they sent us. I could tell you that 50% of the time it was not.
And you weren't doing this via taste testing at this time either.
That's right. And then the other part of the lab was, working up samples, because we blended off as fuel. So, we would do different things with that. So with that job, it was crazy. You would come into work and you had a clean locker room and a dirty locker room. So you had to wear uniforms. So, your uniforms were you're covered head to toe in clothing, no contacts in the plant, hard hats. But we also carried respirators with us everywhere. We had belt respirators that stayed with us everywhere we went. That way, if there was a chemical release or something happened with the sample, you could pop that on. And the craziest thing about it was at the end of the night, you had to go through the dirty side of the locker room. So, you got to take your uniform off, drop it, and then you were required to take a shower before you left. So you actually had somebody that would sit there and make sure that everybody that was coming from the dirty side to the clean side took a shower because they didn't want to contaminate. They obviously didn't want to contaminate anything on the clean side, and they certainly didn't want you taking anything home with them. So, it was one of those things that you just kind of realized, man, maybe this isn't the job that I want to do for the rest of my life.
You didn't come home like glowing in the dark, did you?
I didn't, but it is one of those things. Like when you're working up a sample and all of a sudden the GC's showing that, it's loaded with styrene or PCBs or something like that, you're kind of like, oh my goodness, I've been working with this for 2 hours. But you learn also that every sample you're working up, you pretty much treat like it's the worst thing possible. So that was my exposure to labs initially. So you can imagine when I had an opportunity to go to Beam, and I walk in that first day, and it's khakis.
And you're like, oh, where's
I can wear my contacts. And literally they said, well, one of your main responsibilities as a lab tech here at Beam is to set up the taste panel. It was just, you talk about night and day. Very surreal, but also one of those, okay, now I can see myself, sticking with this industry and working my way through it. So that's kind of how I got in. It was really the lab side of the business that got me in the door. I had experience running a GC and a GC mass spec.
So no showers were necessary at this point, right? So you kind of got out of that
no
habit.
Showers unless mandated by my wife. But yeah, just completely different. But then that was also the first job that we were working in the lab was going out in the plant. whether it was doing line checks for bottling samples to make sure proof and quality were upheld, whether it's package or liquid, to on the distillery side, working up fermenter samples, making sure everything's going right in fermentation so we can control the quality of distillation. You learn so much about the operation. And, I was only in the lab for, it was less than a year, and then basically took an operations role on the environmental side. And so that kind of pulled me out of the lab and got me more involved into operations at Jim Beam. And so we had at the time we had a drinking water plant. We produced all of our own drinking water coming from a lake. And then we also had a wastewater plant. So I was a drinking water operator. I was a wastewater operator. So, we're cleaning the water as it comes in and also cleaning the water as it goes out. And then, did a lot of the environmental stuff on that side and did that. I think I was at Beam for 5 years and then left and went to Maker's Mark. And at Makers, came in doing environmental and quality. And I think I'd been at Makers maybe 7 or 8 months, and Steve Nally announced his retirement. And then Dave Pickerel was our plant manager, and Kevin Smith was our assistant plant manager. People in the industry know both of those guys. And so we had a hell of a team going there at Makers. And knowing Steve was leaving, I went in and talked to those two guys and said, listen, I've always wanted to fully get involved on the distillery side, and would you give me a chance to run the distillery? And they agreed to. I had to keep some of my other responsibilities, but I was like, that's fine. I'll figure that out. I want to, just dive in. So when Steve retired, I took over the distillery at Maker's Mark, and that evolved into a little more of a marketing role as assistant master distiller, and up until the point that I left, or they asked me to leave and go to Cruisin' Rum. So it's just been very interesting, kind of all the different things I've done and how I've ended up here. And I don't know if you want me to go into the Cruisin' Rum stuff or not.
I kind of do, with this whole, you have a history in rum and the fact that there is an uptick in rum right now, the interest in rum. So I kind of just give people a little bit of a flavor about, what the side of that's like as well.
Yeah, so we had bought Cruisin' Rum, I guess this was probably in 2009. And so, Cruisin' was basically, not at the time, they weren't family owned, but they'd always been family operated. The Nelthrop family, they had started Cruisin' Rum, I think 80, 90 years ago, and it changed various hands. Well, as we were having to onboard Cruisin' as an operation, they were having to spend millions of dollars to upgrade their plant and do different things. So they actually asked if, and I think the Nelthrop family actually asked, hey, we're not used to this. We need help. So they asked me to go down there as general manager and run the facility, but at the same time, kind of be a bit of a project manager and help manage, these millions of dollars that we were going to spend to upgrade the facility.
Where was this rum plant?
Yeah, so it was in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands. So it was the U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah, twist my arm to go there, right?
Yeah, yes. I was there for 3 years. Phenomenal place. It's it's one of those. I loved it. It's any island like that, you either love it or you hate it. I absolutely loved it. My wife absolutely hated it
because she didn't get Amazon 2-day Prime delivery, right?
You're right. I mean, it's all those things. No access. No distributed water. Your power goes out 3 or 4 times a day. There are just so many different things that, and I don't want to say we take it for granted here, but that are really magnified when you go to a place like that. The cost of electricity. I mean, we pay 7-8 cents a kilowatt hour here. When we were down there, we were paying 45 cents a kilowatt hour. So the island's beautiful, but there's a lot of things about it that are almost third world.
Sure.
And, they just, it's not an easy place to live, but boy, it is beautiful living there. And I was very lucky to work with the Nelthrops while I was there, learn a lot about, the art of making rum, and truly got an appreciation for rum. I grew up in this area. I was born in Louisville. It's always been whiskey, right? It's always been bourbon. And, I drank a little bit of rum here and there, but usually it was when I was on vacation as a pina colada or, God forbid, a strawberry daiquiri without the umbrella. No umbrellas. But going down there, and then all of a sudden, your rum is the cheapest thing you can buy on island. So you could buy
cheaper than water at that point.
Yeah, you could buy a bottle of rum, for $4, but your 12-pack of Coke might be 10, so but then also an appreciation for aged rum. And, all these things that I learned through, the Nelthrips and what they had done for generations. And so, yeah, I mean, even today, it's obviously I drink a lot of whiskey, but, I certainly take time out to drink a little bit of rum too. Just because there's so much legacy involved if you're doing whiskey and rum comparisons. I mean, just the families behind it and all the different things that we've all had to do to survive. I mean, it's very, very fascinating. And if you've never been to a rum distillery in the Caribbean, it is definitely worth checking out. Very, very interesting operation.
Yeah, it's there is something that's the Bourbon Cruise, I think, that's happening this summer, and I know that it's being ran by Norwegian Cruise Lines, and it's going to be, I know Fred Minnick's on it. There's a bunch of other people that are doing this Norwegian Cruise Line, but it's also going to stop at, I think, a few rum places along the way too, right? So you get a good mix of all that.
Yeah, I've heard, and I know Fred's a big rum guy, and he and I have chatted quite a bit about rum because I love it. I mean, you don't get too much of an opportunity in this area to talk rum. But, I mean, it's, I hope rum sees an uptick. I hope they see growth like we've seen in whiskey. I mean, I think there's a lot of good people behind those brands. And, yeah, absolutely, I'm pulling for all of them. And obviously Heaven Hill. I mean, we've got Admiral Nelson and Blackheart. And, so we've got some phenomenal rums as well. So, yeah. Always keeping an eye on that industry.
Real cool. So the other thing I want to talk about, I kind of, before we dive into a lot of the Heaven Hill stuff, I want to talk about your environmental background, because this is something that I've always been interested to know. You drive by, you'll be in Bardstown, you'll be driving by, and you see these smokestacks that are piling out. And I kind of want to know, what is the environmental impact of, making whiskey today?
Well, it's certainly changed, whether it's how we're regulated on the back end, just because, I mean, when you're making alcohol, I mean, it's, you've got to deal with the stillage that comes off the bottom of the still.
Right.
It's a water grain mix, but it's an organic product. And, ours, you basically try to give away what you can as animal feed. And if you can't do that, then you have to go to other means of basically dewatering. And you can either dewater mechanically, or you can dewater through evaporation. But the end product is still an animal feed, and I think the technology has changed quite a bit. So when you see stacks, more than likely, one, it could just be, we have boilers and we run boilers, so it might be related to boilers, but it could also be related to running a dry house as well. But I also think we've all tried to put practices in to help, not just protect the environment, but invest in the environment, whether it's through, minimal water use programs, to, how we work with the farmers to avoid, water contamination, basically through herbicides and pesticides and things like that. So there are a lot of things. And then, you look at the barrel side of it and the white oak. And I know a lot of people think that a ton of oak is used in our industry. It's really not. I mean,
it's small comparison
very, very small.
To, construction.
Yeah, it's the housing. It's international. It's, if you talk to, we buy barrels from McGinnis and Independent Stave. And just in talking with Don McGinnis not that long ago, Don's like, we have more access to oak now than we've had in probably 30, 40 years, because they've all done reharvesting projects to make sure that, they have a supply of white oak that they can pull from. And then also there's ways to manage forest. It's, you have to thin forest out a little bit in order to allow them to grow and mature, and to allow trees to grow right behind it. So there are practices that they've put in where they are much better situated now than they probably were 30 or 40 years ago. And so, a lot of it is, we obviously want to do the right thing for the environment, but at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of good business sense and efficiencies that come with that.
I've seen a lot of impact, on hunting farms where they pull white oaks. And, when those white oaks are, 100 years old, 100 plus feet tall, they cover the canopy below, or the ground below. And so you don't have a lot of growth. But when you cut a few white oaks, there is an abundance of new growth. And that actually impacts, other animals besides the deer and the turkey.
Sure.
And they replenish. And it's just it's actually helpful similar to way a fire would be helpful in a forest where you just see a renaissance of growth that those old forests haven't seen in years. So
you're absolutely right, and we can talk about the bourbon industry and the families involved with that. If you start looking at the barrel side of the business and the families that are involved there, you talk about interesting, and it's all those things that you just talked about. I mean, they'll work locally with whatever state they're in with the forestry divisions and things like that, because it's right and it's smart, and and it's a fascinating side of the business, because a typical oak tree that gets harvested to make a barrel is probably 70, 80, 90 years old. So just like you said, when they come down and they get used, well, then that allows more light access in the forest and for saplings to grow right behind it, and they know that. And so they invest in it, and it's just good for everybody. But in the grand scheme of things, it's the barrels are just a blip on the radar for where white oak is actually used.
Okay, cool. So now I want to go ahead and fast forward a little bit to when you came to Heaven Hill and kind of how you carved your path to where you were today with inside these walls.
Yeah, so I came over to Heaven Hill. It would have been. Actually, it's almost exactly 4 years. It was in June of 2013. Came from Beam, so I spent 16 years within Beam. That included I kind of went into Jim Beam Claremont, the 7 years at Maker's Mark, the 3 years at Cruisin' Rum, and then I spent another year at the Jim Beam Frankfurt plant. So came over, title distillery plant manager. Main focus was the Bernheim operation. We're located in West Louisville. We kind of have it's our own separate plant. We have our own local union, so we kind of operate pretty independent of what goes on in Bardstown. And so we have distilling and we have warehousing here. So that's what I did. Up until very, very recently, that's what I did. And then it was probably, I think, 2.5 years ago where obviously with Parker's illness. Craig was very busy, whether it was because of Parker's illness or other things, where they needed help on the marketing side, because we all know it's all about being out there talking to people, educating, doing tastings, things like that. And they just said, hey, would you be interested in being one of our master distillers? And it's one of those you're like, I'm sorry,
dream job,
absolutely, yeah. So
another twist my arm kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just very surreal, obviously. But at the same time, just one of those things where it's very humbling to be asked to do something like that. And so my day-to-day job was identical, didn't change at all, just took on some additional responsibility on the marketing side. And so that was kind of it up until, May, where I was promoted to vice president of operations and master distiller. So I've expanded responsibility.
It's always great. Yeah, more responsibility, same amount of pay, right?
Yeah, I mean, once again, just humbled again to be asked to do it, and so now I have responsibility not just of the Bernheim plant, but also the Bardstown and then the Deep Eddy operation in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, with Parker passing, it's a lot of big shoes to fill, right? But it seems like you're already kind of on your rocket ship upwards.
Well, I mean, I think, it's no secret, and I don't think I ever made it a secret, is that, I want to stay involved with operations. I mean, that's what I want to do. And having the Master Distiller title is fantastic, and I love it, and I don't want that to change. But at the same time, if you have an opportunity to kind of grow your responsibilities on the operations side, that's what I want to do. I mean, that's what I enjoy doing. So it's fantastic that I can continue on the education side, but at the same time, expand my operational role and learn. I don't want to be in a position where I'm not learning anymore and I'm not, able to do a few different things. So to have this is just, it's great. And just very, very early into it, we got great people that are already doing all these things. Now it's up to me to figure out what they need to continue to do their job and honestly not to get in their way. I mean, it's this company's been around for 81 years. They're very good at what they do, and I just need to figure out how can I help that? How can I keep that going? And it's so far so good. I mean, we'll see, but I definitely have a lot to learn.
So let's move into a little bit about the operations. Heaven Hill has a very wide portfolio of the products you sell and everything like that. Now, I know whiskey is distilled here. Any other kind of spirits that are done here as well?
Well, we only distill whiskey here at the Bernheim operation, but we also have our brandy operation here. So we do the Christian Brothers brand here. We don't distill it. It's distilled out in California. We bring it in, but then we age it in our used whiskey barrels, typically our bourbon barrels. So it's aged here, then we'll dump it here, and then truck it out to Bardstown for bottling. So just distill whiskey, but we also do brandy as well, at least the brandy maturation side.
So how many barrels of whiskey are you producing here per day then?
Today, on average, about 1,000 barrels per day. And so we run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're undergoing an expansion. The expansion we've been working on for 2 years now will be complete mid-July. So when we come off of our summer shutdown, which is 3 weeks long this year, we'll be firing up expansion, and it'll take a little bit of time, but we should be up to about 1,300 barrels a day once that's online.
I mean, that's a lot of barrels. I mean, around here, you can come around this downtown part of Louisville, and you can drive by. I mean, it's right next to Brown-Forman, and you can see actually your rick houses that are here on the site, right? They're big brick monstrosities.
Right.
So how full are these warehouses versus, how much are you trucking out to Bardstown to go and age, and how full are those? Because I know you guys are even expanding to even bigger 55,000 barrel rick houses out there too.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as the maturation side, here at the Bernheim plant, we've had the same warehouses. They were all built right after Prohibition. So absolutely zero expansion on the maturation side here. We just can't do it. I mean, we don't have the room to do it.
Real estate's not cheap around
right.
downtown either, right?
But we have 47 additional warehouses in Nelson County. So we have 6 total warehouse sites. One here in Jefferson County attached to the Bernheim operation, and then 5 additional in Nelson County. So we have over 1.2 million barrels in inventory. Right now, we're probably a little shy of 1.3 million spaces. So we're, I can tell you, it's one thing to expand the distillery. It's another thing to be thinking ahead of that, which is, do we have places to put these barrels? We bought a 6th warehouse site 2 years ago, bought another about 200 acres with the idea of putting an additional 10 warehouses on those sites. Like you said, about 57,000 barrels is what they'll hold. Before the first one opened up, we were probably at 97% capacity. So very tight. We're basically, as we're pulling barrels out for dumping, we are putting barrels right behind them. But with that, we've accelerated our plan for maturation. So we built 2 warehouses last year. We just opened a 3rd one on that site about 3 or 4 weeks ago. A 4th one will be open this fall, and then more than likely we'll build 2 next year. And we'll probably build out until we have the full 10 on that site. So that's one side of it. It's just making sure that we're doing that investment up front. And it's just crazy. I mean, those warehouses are, probably $5 million, $5.5 million. I mean, they're not cheap, but it's not like you don't build these and get a return on it immediately. No. I mean, I tell people all the time, I mean, anybody that were to walk into a bank with a business plan to start a new distillery, it's insane. I mean, it's, all right, we need X million dollars for capital to build the plant. By the way, we need X million to operate the plant because we got to buy new barrels, we got to buy grain, we got to do all this. Oh, and we're going to put these barrels away. Oh, and we're not going to get them out for 5, 6, 12, 23 years. Oh, and guess what? While that's happening, we're losing inventory.
And you're paying a lot of taxes.
And we're paying taxes. So the angel share, the taxes, I mean, it's just nuts. But because we've been around for so long and we're so well established and we've got, such brands that have, weight in the industry, we can do these things up front and manage the business and do things the right way. So, building these warehouses and then, doing our distillery expansion is $20 million. So, we can do all these things with the idea of, well, we need to get to where we're hopefully meeting demand, but at the same time, not just going gangbusters on everything. I don't want to say it's slow growth, but it's controlled. It's controlled spend. But it's just phenomenal, the investment that we're putting in and that everybody else is putting in right now.
I was about to say, you could almost coin like a new operational term for what you're doing, running at 97% capacity, just like JITD, right? Just in time distilling,
that's
right?
Yeah. And so, with the opening of the new, we're not at that capacity anymore, but I can tell you it doesn't take long to get there. If we don't stay on this growth plan for warehousing, then and now all of a sudden your warehouse space is controlling your distillery operation and that schedule. And we've been running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for 2.5 years, and it's still not enough. I mean,
that's a good problem to have versus the other way around.
It's an excellent problem to have. Yeah. I mean, it really is. But it can be problematic. I mean, just because of the spend involved, and I feel like we've had contractors. I mean, there are contractors that have been at this distillery as long as I have. Mm-hmm. For the 4 years that I've been here, and. But it's good. I mean, it's absolutely good problems to have, no doubt.
So coming from the operations side, like what's more expensive to run, like the distillery operation or like say the aging operation where you have to put in the capital to be able to build all these warehouses and sit there and wait versus something that you can just say distill, right? I mean, there's equipment that goes into there as well and people.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I guess, if you're looking at capital, it's the distillery. If you're looking at operating expense and some of the others, then, the cost of that barrel is significant. And, so to spend that up front and to let it sit there. And, obviously, on the distillery side, you've got the grain costs and everything else, but nothing equates to the cost of that barrel. So it's a little of both. So on the capital side, it's the distillery. But I think if you're looking at, just stuff that's going on the balance sheet, it's hard to discount, the cost of, like I said, the barrels plus the taxes and the fact that you're losing inventory to Angel share.
Right. So, you mentioned already having 6 different warehouse sites and you being a part of this, have you able to taste like a lot of like maybe differences in the taste or the flavors, the way that a barrel matures depending on the site? Because, it could just be, the type of wood or where it was in the warehouse and all this other kind of stuff. But is the location playing a big part? Because these are not like, a mile from the road each other. We're talking, sometimes 20, 30, 40-minute drives.
No question. But you get variation even in the same warehouse on the same warehouse site. We just did a really cool event last week for Bourbon Affair where we took people. We started out at the Bardstown site, and then we went to Shenley and sampled a barrel that had been aging there. Then we went to Cox's Creek, had lunch there. Then we went to Deatsville and sampled a barrel there. And, just in that, because each of these sites are at different elevations, right? And then the warehouses that are on those sites, how many floors those warehouses are, and what floor the barrel goes in at, and, how long the barrel stays there. That's, there's a reason why, we're able to have the portfolio that we have because of maturation. And, we've got, with the 54 warehouses and all the different floors and the different ages, and there is no doubt, but to say that one site is better than the other, it's hard to say that. And we pull some damn good whiskey from Deatsville, there's no doubt about it. But I can tell you, this Cox's Creek site that we've had barrels in now for maybe a year, it's going to be a phenomenal site. You see it when you're driving Bardstown Road, coming from Louisville to Bardstown. You're going to know when you're about 8 miles outside of Bardstown, you look to the right, you're going to see the 3 new warehouses that we have opened up and then the other one that's under construction. And just the elevation and the airflow that exists up at the top of that hill. I'm just excited about what we're going to be able to get out of that. But, it's hard to sit here and say that one site is absolutely better than another just because of the variation you can get just within one single warehouse.
Absolutely. And I think, people love it when we talk a little about the brands themselves. So what are the, you already talked about some of the difference in the mash bills that, everything's available on the website for you. But mash bill aside, like what are some of those other major differences, whether you're pulling them from different warehouses and different locations that go into things like, whether it's a Henry McKenna bottled and bond, a little bit kind of a smaller batch versus something that's like Evan Williams, much larger batch, or Larceny or something like that.
Right. It depends on the brand. Obviously, that's pretty simple. If you're, it all starts with the mash bill. We run 5 traditional American whiskey mash bills. Primarily, we run a bourbon rye mash bill, which is going to be the base for the Evan Williams, the Elijah Craig, the Henry McKenna. We run a bourbon wheat, which is the base for Old Fitz and Larceny. We run a wheat whiskey, which is Bernheim. We run a rye whiskey, which is Rittenhouse and Pikesville. We run a corn whiskey, which is Mellow Corn and Georgia Moon. So we can run these 5 mash bills, but, based on, how long, what warehouse, how long they've been in and everything else, you can get a vastly different product. So let's look at Henry McKenna. Well, the Henry McKenna is a 10-year bottled and bond. So we know, all right, well, we got the mash bill because it's a bourbon rye mash bill. All right, we need something that's 10 years. We need something that's going to be 100 proof. So those are the things when you're looking in inventory, you're kind of like, and it's got to be a single barrel. So you're limited in what you can pull for something like that. Now, if you're looking at an Evan Williams Black, same mash bill, right? Now, typically our Evan Williams is going to be, over 5 years old, which for the number 2 bourbon in the world, to have an age statement like that, not an age statement, but that's basically what we're pulling. And then on top of it, at 86 proof is phenomenal. I mean, it's just unreal. But, but we're going to do a bigger dump when it comes to that. So maybe it's 2,000 barrels. So you got a drastically different product because you got a single barrel with the Henry McKenna. Well, then now you got the Evan Williams and all the differences I've already talked about. But with the Evan Williams, we're really wanting consistency too. So we got to pull 2,000 barrels that are similar in age, or if anything, at least balance themselves out to hold true to the quality of and consistency of an Evan Williams Black. If you're looking at Elijah Craig, we're looking at Elijah Craig small batch in an 8 to 12 year range. We know the taste profile we're kind of going for. I can tell you, it's weighted average right now. It's right at 11 years. So it's got a lot of age in those dumps. So it really just depends on the brand. But, you can do a lot of different things with a similar mash bill. But it just depends on the brand, and then how we run it on the line. How much liquid do we need in order to?
There's a lot of variables to go into.
Yeah, there's a ton, absolutely,
to a product.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was thinking like it might, for my opinion, it might just be an impossible puzzle to solve because you've got all these different locations that not all of them are spun up, but a lot of them are, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of them are available, and you got to be able to pick and choose like where these barrels are going to come from, and whether it take 20 from side A and 20 from side B and marry them together, and they still fit the same flavor profile that you're supposed to expect.
It obviously it depends on the size of the dump too. So it's one of those. If you're doing a 2,000, we have the institutional knowledge to know that we can pull 30 barrels from this floor at this site and 30 barrels from this floor at this site, and we just know that, and if we dump that together, that it's going to be a fairly consistent product. Now, if you're looking like an Elijah Craig where you're doing a 200 barrel dump or anything that's smaller than that, then yeah, I mean it's not unusual for us to send people out into the warehouses to grab samples from different areas to make sure.
You want to be absolutely sure.
Yeah, and if we need to mingle that in the lab before we do the dump, then that's what we'll do. So there's a part of that happens as well, depending on what product it is.
So I kind of want to move a little bit and even to some of the higher age statements, right? So, once was almost impossible for Heaven Hill to even get rid of. Now Heaven Hill has been known for some of their higher aged ones amongst the whiskey geeks. Martin Mills 24-year unicorns to Elijah Craig 18 and 23, William Heaven Hill 14 and 15 years. Do you anticipate the future of whiskey drinkers, maybe even like 10 or 12, 15 years from now, to still be wanting some of those higher aged limited edition products?
I definitely think that people will always want it. It's unique, right? I mean, it's just it's a story to think that just the thought today. We're making distillate today. We're running a bourbon rye, so there's a good chance that one of the barrels that we fill, one of those 1,000 barrels that we fill per day, is probably going to be an Elijah Craig 23-year-old. How cool is that? That means I'll be 67 years old when that product hits the market.
Ready.
So I think there's part of that that I don't think ever goes away, where people are just going to be really, really interested in these products that are 18 and 23. Now I'll tell you, I don't have to have an 18 or 23 to put a smile on my face. One of the products we've already talked about, the Henry McKenna 10-year bottle and bond that you can buy locally for $30 a bottle.
Yeah, we're not supposed to talk about that too much.
Well, exactly.
We're getting the word out there.
That is probably the best delicious value in whiskey, period.
I get it all the time. People will ask me if I'm doing a seminar somewhere, what's your go-to? And it depends on what I answer. But when I talk about Henry McKenna, a lot of people don't know too much about it. If they didn't know about it, I'll eventually hear back from them, and they'll say, oh, that was unbelievable. But almost every time after the seminar is over, somebody will walk up and say exactly what you guys just said, which is, don't freaking talk about it.
Yeah, we shouldn't talk about it, because before we know it, it's getting up the way Elijah Craig, and now we're going to have Henry McKenna bottled and bond without an age statement. So we got to slow down on some of that talking.
but yeah, I mean, so I'm very happy. I love Elijah Craig small, but I absolutely am infatuated with the Elijah Craig barrel proof. I mean, I don't know if there's at least in our portfolio, a better nose on a bourbon than what you can get out of that Elijah Craig barrel proof. And I love our 18 and I love our 23, and that's really good too. But it's kind of a niche market. Even now it is. I mean, it's not cheap to get. I think it's fairly affordable for what we sell it for an 18 or a 23. But but as an everyday drinker, no. I mean, that's a very special occasion. So you're always going to have special occasions. You're always going to have people that are going to want to go after that 18 or 23-year-old.
I like the 125 hand grenade, the 125 proof hand grenade. I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it was a big hit last week at Bourbon Affair. People, I mean, because it's not, obviously it's not something we advertise, but it's something neat that people can take home. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think the higher age statements, people are. I mean, at least today's market, it seems like people really want them. I don't know if it's just the infatuation with it or whatever it is, but I guess how are you able to forecast something like that too? I mean, are you just saying like, what, I'll make it, you all forecast and figure out how often how much you're going to keep these barrels for the next 5 years to get us over this hump until we can
well, I mean, it's a couple different things, right? And one is just a bit of a discussion on forecasting, and then the other is specifically the Elijah Craig 18 and 23, and I can go into a little bit of that. I always tell people, and I've probably said it so much that people are like, "Oh my God, he's saying it again." If you were to sit in, one of our demand planned meetings, it's an exercise in insanity. Okay, when you're trying to determine what your production schedule is going to be today, your mash bill, your volume, and all that, based on where we think consumers might be. Well, let's just take Evan Williams Black, a 5.5-year-old or something like that, or an Elijah Craig that's going to be close to 12, or the 18 or the 23. It is insane. I mean, you can't help but laugh sometimes when you're talking about this stuff. And I joke when I say it, but it's pretty much the truth. If you get it right, you screwed up somewhere. Mm-hmm. Or, there is absolutely no way to predict it.
It's basically like, we should probably have flying cars by then too,
well,
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, man, it's nuts.
There was a previous podcast, you had maybe Harlan Wheatley on, or somebody from Buffalo Trace, and they said they're forecasting 37 years out.
Yeah, I mean, that's real. I believe it. I wouldn't say that we go that far out, but I can tell you, I mean, we're out there. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Because you have to do that. And it's, let's talk, Elijah Craig, right? I mean, it's, I've talked about how transparent we are, and I feel like we've been very transparent about Elijah Craig and going from the 12-year age statement to the small batch. Well, I mean, there you go, right? I mean, so we have a brand like Elijah Craig that has a 12-year age statement that had been around for 30 years. Wasn't new, wasn't something we put out 7 or 8 years ago with an age statement, had been out for 30 years. Hadn't put a lot of marketing dollars behind it, didn't really need to, but was a brand that was known as a quality, affordable bourbon. So imagine when we're sitting in and we're trying to look at the next year's sales and what the demand is and everything else, and we immediately realize, holy crap, Elijah Craig 12, if we were to maintain, we're going to lose 30% in volume. Now, you got to remember at this time, too, Elijah Craig 18 and 23 were not on the market. Mm-hmm. We were dry. And everywhere I went, the first question I would always get is, when are we getting Larceny? And then the second question I would get is, when's the 18-year-old coming back? 12 years before, nobody could have predicted, where this growth was going to come from, and this, the cocktail culture that exists that has really driven a lot of the whiskey consumption. So we're looking at a brand that had been around for 30 years that we're going to have to retract by 30% if we stick to 12 year. And oh, by the way, we don't have 18 and 23. And on top of it, the Elijah Craig barrel proof goes away. Was already hard to get anyway. That goes away. So we're retracting 30%. well, guess what? That price is going to be doubled. Because the brand, I mean, you're running the risk of killing the brand. So when you're looking at it from our point of view and you're like, how can we salvage this? You know, how can we work with this? And you start looking at, well, if we take the 12-year off and we go to a range of 8 to 12-year, well, we knew right away that we were going to be able to keep something close to 12-year, but at the same time, be able to take those barrels that we were going to have to use up with the 12-year age statement and then set them aside for the Elijah Craig barrel proof, to bring the 18 back, to know that we're going to have barrels for 23. So now we have protected the entire Elijah Craig family. And that's what we've really done here is we've got the small batch, we've got a 12-year, it's at barrel proof, and we've got an 18, and the last 2 years we've released a 23 as well. And then on top of it, we can potentially grow this Elijah Craig brand and maintain price. So there you go. You have a 12-year-old at the time that's $30 a bottle. Now we're close to 11. The prices remain the same. I'm telling you, 10 out of 10 times we make the same decision because everything that we were wanting to do with that brand and the extensions off of it, we've done. And I mean, last week at Bourbon Affair, I couldn't tell you how many people came up and said, "So glad to see that you guys are putting barrels behind the barrel proof and that it's accessible." Maybe not the easiest thing in the world to get, but we're releasing it 3 times a year at a minimum, which we weren't doing before, and you're going to still see the 18 and the 23. So, but that all starts with what we were thinking. I guess it would have been 14 years ago when we were looking at Elijah Craig 12, but at the same time, a lot of good things have come out of that, and honestly, by going to a small batch with a 200 barrel dump, it's allowed us to be a lot more consistent with the liquid inside the small batch. Because before, if you got a 12-year age statement like that, you're taking that 12-year wherever you can get it. Wherever that 12-year-old barrel is, you're grabbing it and it's going in. Whereas now we can mingle and we can take 10 barrels from the top of the floor and 10 barrels from the bottom of the floor. Because I'm here to tell you, 10 8-year-old barrels from the top are pretty daggone similar to 10 12-year-old barrels at the bottom.
Yeah.
So now it gives us the luxury of holding consistency and quality. And that's just one example. But people get raked over the coals for taking an age statement off, whereas, okay, so we went from 12-year to small batch, but guess what? We maintained an age statement and we brought 2 back with the 18 and the 23. So, we've got, our family, the Shapiro family that's been running this business for 81 years, they kind of know what they're doing, and that's why we've been around, and that's why we're still privately held and growing. And I mean, it's just, you're going to take a few punches, but at the end of the day, it was the right decision to make.
I think, for anybody that just wasn't able to just see what happened right there, I mean, there was so much passion that just came out of you right there, just with either age statements or sacrificing or whatever it is, right? Just to, keep the integrity of
well, it's, it's something for me. I mean, I rather talk about it than get asked the question, because typically when you get asked the question, it's coming from a negative aspect. It's usually somebody that wants to just chastise us for taking the age statement off. I like to get out in front of that and say, I mean, yes, if we had enough barrels, we probably wouldn't be talking about an Elijah Craig small batch. But guess what? We would have still had 18. We would have still had the barrel proof, but we didn't. Right? We didn't, because nobody knew what was going to happen. So, I mean, I'm just telling you, 10 out of 10 times we make the same decision, and to know that and to make the decision and be comfortable with it. And then, it's great. to see the barrel proof out there in the 18 and the 23, I'm happy as hell, because they weren't there 2-3 years ago. So it's exciting to still have those brands out there, and it's all because of one decision.
So there's one other brand I want to kind of talk about, because at least, we talk a lot about Heaven Hill has more bottled and bond products than any other company within the portfolio. But there's a little gem that you can only get here in Kentucky, and that's the 6-year white label, right? So I guess when you travel, do people ask a lot about that one as well? Because we know we tell people all the time, if you're swinging through Kentucky, you better just go ahead and grab a 6-pack of it, because it's about the best bang for your buck right there.
We can talk about Henry McKenna. There's categories of gems, right? And there is no doubt that the Heaven Hill 6-year bottled and bond is one of those. And we feel that Bernie Lubbers, who is our American whiskey ambassador and works with Heaven Hill, single-handedly has brought the bottled and bond portfolio back. And I think a lot of people outside of Heaven Hill will at least give Bernie a lot of credit for that. no doubt. If I'm going to Chicago or New York or mixologists that we've developed relationships with will be, they're not asking us to bring them a bottle of Elijah Craig 18 or even the Henry McKenna. They're asking for, please, for the love of God, bring me a case of Heaven Hill bottled in bond. And it's because, we joke, but it's the truth. If you paid $12 for a fifth, you paid too much for a 6-year 100 proof. So they can take that bottle, and if you're in New York, let's say an $11.20 bottle. I think that's what it was the last time I was in the liquor store, which may or may not have been yesterday. So take an $11 bottle of bourbon and make a $15 quality cocktail with it. They absolutely love it. Mixologists are just, they don't go for...
There's your margins right there.
Yeah, no, it is. They're running businesses too, and God knows that the bar and restaurant industry is the toughest one to be in. So whenever you have, these products like this, that's what they ask for. That's what they want. And because we're family owned and operated, and because we don't answer to a shareholder, they love the fact that we've got a 6-year bottled in bond out there for under $12. I think one of the things that they've always held true to is quality and value, and maybe even to a fault. Honestly, you look at how people might stack us up, and if they're just looking at price, we're never going to win because we've got some unbelievable prices on some of these mature products that are on the market, with that Heaven Hill 6-year-old just being ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I've got 3 bottles of it at my bar at home. Everybody. And people are starting, it's funny because even last week, if I'm doing an event or anything and I'm signing bottles, every now and then somebody will bring one of those Heaven Hill white labels, and you just kind of make eye contact and just kind of chuckle a little bit and be like, all right, this guy knows what he's doing. That's pretty cool. I'm glad you brought that up because it's one not a lot of people talk about, but man alive, if you're in this area, get all over it.
I love it.
So there's kind of like one last way I kind of want to close this out. Charlie Downs is kind of like a peer to yours, right? He does this thing over the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience, but he's also almost like a hamster in a cage sometimes, right? Like people will be there and they'll pull up the red curtain and they're like, oh, and there's Charlie right there. Yeah, wave it, give him a wave, Charlie. I guess you kind of have a little bit different aspect to it, right? Because you're over here doing a much larger operation, but you're really not a hamster in a cage and getting all that publicity or public-facing interaction on a day-to-day basis. And that's okay with you, right?
Oh my goodness, are you kidding me? Yeah, it's absolutely okay with me. But you got to remember too. Charlie ran this facility for a long time. He was here at Bernheim. He was part of the crew that came in when we bought this place in '99. He worked the distillery in Bardstown. So he's done all this a lot longer than I've done it, and I think it was a situation with Charlie because when I came on board, the family had asked Charlie, like, listen, we need you at the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience because it's a fully functioning distillery, whether it's 1,000 barrels or 1 barrel. The knowledge and experience still has to be there. It's still the same concepts, the same principles.
It's a great. I send so many people right down the street from where I am at Art Eatables to Evan Williams.
Well, I think it'll be 4 years, I guess, this November when it opened, and so it's the anchor, right, for everything that is going on Whiskey Row, and with Brown-Forman and Michter's and Angel's Envy, and are you kidding me? Main Street Louisville, if it's not already fantastic, is going to be that much better. And to have and I think our facility has been fantastic. With one, I think people realizing, holy cow, this is really interesting and neat, and people will come see it. And downtown Louisville is a place that people want to come stay. So, no question. The Evan Williams Bourbon Experience is just a phenomenal place. You get a lot of great history on Louisville, but a lot of that too. And I know we originally had started talking about Charlie, but I think one of the things that and that Charlie's been able to do the last 4 years is, Charlie has an incredible passion for what we do as well, and it comes through. He loves talking about it just like I do, and good for him, for to be able to run a distillery and also still be able to get out and talk about it and educate, and I know he loves interacting with people down there, so he definitely has. But he's done it all. He he definitely he's run a big workhorse like this before. So, but yeah,
he could take a little bit of a breather then, right? There's a little bit of less moving parts.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a breather because it's a lot more hands on there. But I just know, Charlie's very good dealing with the public, and it's one of these things. At any time you've got somebody that's going to be speaking on behalf of your company, good, bad, or indifferent, they have to have a little bit of passion to them, and Charlie has that. And then he's been with the company for 40 plus years, so he's worked with a lot of the beams. Just the stories that he has are just phenomenal. You can't duplicate that kind of stuff.
So I guess one last thing, because I would do myself a disservice, especially for some of our listeners that are down in Texas. One thing that happened, I think, maybe 2 years ago when Heaven Hill acquired Deep Eddy. Right. So I know it's funny. I've got some coworkers that live in Austin. They're like, "What do you mean? It's not all Austin anymore?" I'm like, kind of a little bit, but you're kind of taking that over. So how often are you going to be in Austin and eating good barbecue and stuff like that?
Well, we acquired Deep Eddy. I guess, it's probably been close to 2 years ago. The interesting thing about Deep Eddy, it's all going to be done there. It's remaining there. Everything they've done, I think that brand started in 2012. One of the things that we noticed when I was part of the due diligence team when we were acquiring Deep Eddy, and went down and a couple of us and looked at the operation, and we knew immediately that if this brand is forecasting out the way we think it is, we have to move to a different facility. The one they had is not big enough to reach the growth that we think this brand is going to reach. So we're currently moving the main operation to a different part of Austin, but keeping their current operation, which is a phenomenal visitor's experience if you've never been there. It's just in a great part of Texas. As you're heading outside of Austin. And so that'll remain. And then we'll do a little bit of production there. But then, the bulk of the production is going to move to another site just outside of Austin. I've already been down, even before the promotion. I think I've been down 3 or 4 times. We've got a great plant manager in place there. They've got their own team. They've got John Scarborough as the president. I'm literally more of a, we've been doing operations for 81 years. We're here to help you. That's my role. It's very difficult to go teach them what they know because they've built a very successful brand. So it's basically just letting them know that, hey, we're a phenomenal resource for you all. And we're going to help you guys grow the brand and hopefully hit some of these forecast numbers. And so I don't know, probably 2 or 3 times a year if they need me down there more than that. I'm heading down next week. But more than anything, it's just being an ear and then, helping them out any way I can.
Well, awesome. Denny, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today and, again, telling us your history and, some good stories about working in chemical plants and stuff like that. I think that's a first for us.
Absolutely. I don't think I've talked about that. Yeah, we won't get into too much of that. There are more stories. May or may not have had to strip my clothes off in the middle of the lab.
All right, give us one more before we close off here then.
Oh, this was terrible. So I was doing a lot of times you got to do like a metals digestion to, just to figure, it's just part of breaking the samples down, and was using hydrofluoric acid. And if you know anything about hydrofluoric acid, it's pretty nasty.
I don't. I'm just going to take your word for it.
Well, it's one of those. If it gets on you,
that's what they used in The Sopranos, right?
Yeah, it's going for the somebody. It's in and I had knocked a sample over that had some hydrofluoric acid in it, and it went right on my pants, and I knew immediately that I've got to get out of these pants. So if you work in a lab, you know that labs in most processing facilities will have safety showers that are usually located. They got to be located in an area that you can get to. So this one was pretty much right. I wasn't in the middle of the lab, but it might as well have been. So it probably took me about 10 seconds to get out of my clothes and get under that shower. Not completely out of my clothes. Mainly the areas that had the acid on it. But and that might have been when I decided I need to start looking.
Time to hang up my hat here.
I can't do this anymore. But yeah, so that was a long night. Let's put it.
I was about to say, yeah,
that was a long night.
Deep thinking, right?
Yeah.
All All right. Well, Denny, again, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, this is just fantastic. Just because you have a good amount of history just that goes into the industry, the experience, as well as the phenomenal things that are actually happening here at Heaven Hill as well. So,
well, I just appreciate the time, guys. I mean, we enjoy this kind of stuff, and come back after expansion.
Yeah, you do good at the marketing side, right? That's why they hired you to do this, right? Yeah, and you can tell there's a passion behind there. And so, Linden, thank you again too for coming on and throwing in a few good questions as well.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. So if you like what you hear, make sure you tell a friend. Podcasts are a great way to kill the time. We were just telling Denny when he's driving back and forth between Louisville and Bardstown and, on those trips to Austin, check us out. Tell a friend, anybody that is listening or, drinking bourbon, wants to learn more. Tell them about Bourbon Pursuit and all the great information that you have here. Write us a review on iTunes because those iTunes reviews go pretty far as well. Follow us on all those great social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if anybody out there want to talk about, getting this podcast in front of 7,000 to 10,000 bourbon aficionados and whiskey geeks, we have sponsorships and advertisements available. Go to bourbonpursuit.com, look for the partnerships tab at the top, and you can send us an email and download our media kit and learn more. With that, again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.